Thank you for joining us for another episode of Exposing Scientology, where we reveal what really goes on inside this business masquerading as a church. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am thrilled to have my friend Phil Jones on with me today. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me on. This is great.
Of course. Look, anybody that doesn't know who Phil and his wife Willie are, they have been activists about the abuses of Scientology, particularly with respect to disconnection and the estrangement of their son and daughter, Mike and Emily. And they famously created the Call Me billboard, which I'll put up on screen here. You can see, paid for by Phil Jones and friends, to my loved ones.
They did trim those bushes, by the way.
I know. This is the photo that appeared in the Tampa Bay Times and also in LA, even though you had a different one in LA. But whatever, this billboard was an attempt to encourage not only Phil and Willie's son and daughter, but also these are little pictures of disconnected family members in Scientology that make up the background of this. And this was quite a I don't know what I'm not sure exactly what to call it, Phil. Like it had a lot
of impact. It was a moment. We got a lot of press, international press. Even Australia. We were on the morning show here in the States. Good Morning America, but we did get a lot of press out of it. All those little pictures on there. When we first had the design of the billboard done, we thought, oh, how are we going to contact all these people for permission? So instead of doing that, we just blurred them all. That made it a little bit easier.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that actually in the end, none of them would have minded. In fact, I'm sure they would have all been happy to participate in any effort to reconcile families. And I know that you and your beautiful wife have continued to do the work and put in the time and make the effort to bring awareness to the world of what really goes on in Scientology, and it's greatly appreciated. And I just want to take a moment at the outset to thank you both for the work that you have done.
Well, thanks, Mike. I sometimes consider we're kind of back there, but we're trying to keep doing stuff. We still have stuff in the works.
Well, that's the reason that we're talking today, actually. Because you came up with something that I was completely unaware of that actually shocked me. And I think it's worth discussing. I think it's worth bringing to broader light the facts of the matter. And we need to start by sort of setting the stage a bit about what it means to be a Scientology org staff member or a Sea Org member, and how you get paid. And I will, because this discussion today concerns the laws in Canada with respect to minimum wage. And I'll let you sort of roll with this, because this is really your thing, that you are the one that brought this to my attention. I don't want to be stealing your thunder.
Oh, no, that's fine. In Canada, well, like anywhere in the world, Scientology is paid on a per unit basis. It's a formula that Hubbard came up with. And all staff members, whether they're in an org or in the Sea Org, they're all contracted, whether it's in an org 2.5-year or 5-year contract, or in the Sea Org a billion-year contract. They get paid a specific amount. In the Sea Org, I think it's $40-50 a week in org staff, based on the units, and that's based on how much the org brings in after it's whittled down. When I was on staff, this was years ago, but at the end of the week, you'd get an envelope. I remember getting $4.21, and seven. If it was $7, it was high. And
Right.
because you're on org staff, you're not working the hours that Sea Org people work, so you'd have to kind of have a side job. A lot of staff
Moonlighting.
moonlighting. That's exactly what they called it. But even so, being on staff, it wasn't always a 40-hour week. Even if you were on like day or evening staff, evening and weekends, it's usually longer than 40 hours. You're going to be working that 50 hours, and so you don't have a whole lot of time for moonlighting, but you have to squeeze it in somehow. So sleep suffers, but the pay is terrible. I mean, you cannot live on the money that Scientology pays the staff, whether it's, org staff or Sea Org.
Of course. You mentioned that it's a unit system, and what that means is each position in the organization is allocated a certain number of units, and you add up the total number of units for all of the staff and then divide it into the amount of money available to pay them. And then if you have 10 units, you might qualify for $5, and if you had 20 units, you'd qualify for $10. But the amount of the staff pay sum is dictated by policy and the financial planning of the organization for the week. But there are things that are required to be taken out of the income of any Scientology organization before anything gets allocated to the local organization to spend. They have to pay money to international management. They have to pay money to have the films in their organizations. They have to pay to replenish their book stocks if they've sold any books. They have to pay FSM commissions. If someone has brought a new sucker in and gotten them to pay, they got their 10%, you have to pay that off the top. There's all these expenses that come, and then there is what's called the allocation sum for the organization, which is fought over by the financial planning committee. But there are requirements there too. 14% of that allocation sum must go to sending out promo. Now, as nutty as that is in this day and age, it is one of the reasons why people continue to get mailboxes full of junk mail from Scientology, because they are required to spend 14% of their allocation on sending out mail and letters. And, there is Hubbard policy that says, outflow is holier and more remunerative than inflow, and the size, not the quality of an organization's mailing list, and the number of mailings to it determine the gross income. And then there are all sorts of other expenses. I mean, they have to pay obviously for their electricity and their utilities and all of these things that if they don't pay for them, they get shut off. And usually organizations are way behind in paying those bills. And when you get down to the pay for the staff, that's one of the last things that ever gets money allocated to it, because you can cut it back. And the only consequence of cutting it back is that the poor staff members, instead of getting $40 a week, get 30 or 20 or 5
Or
or none.
or 0, right.
And they all don't live on their staff pay because they have to have other jobs, even when it's as Phil said, when it's a good week and they get $7, that's not enough to live on.
No, you can't do anything with that. The way Scientology gets around it, or what they say is that they're either volunteers or that they're religious workers.
Right.
Um, and that's their go-to as far as what they're saying is why they justify being able to pay like that.
Right. And unfortunately, that has worked in a lot of places. It has worked in the United States where the contracts all say I'm volunteering, and even though the requirement is that you show up, like if you don't show up and claim, well, I'm just a volunteer, so I didn't show up to my post this morning, you will be subject to a committee of evidence and called on the carpet and required to undergo ethics handling and making amends and all sorts of stuff. It is a fictional sham that staff members in Scientology organizations are volunteers. No, they are conscripts.
Right, and if you leave before your contract is up, they'll levy a freeload, what they call a freeloader's debt on you for any courses, auditing, any services that you received in there. They in spite of all the 50, 60-hour work weeks you've done, they say you're a freeloader, and they bill you tens of thousands of dollars sometimes.
That's exactly right, Phil. So this sham that Scientology staff or Sea Org members are in fact volunteers is easy to see through, but unfortunately, in many places, it has been accepted by the government agencies, and I mean most particularly in the United States. Canada, however, turns out to be a slightly different proposition. And Phil has done a bunch of research and dug up what the federal laws are in Canada with respect to minimum wage. And we will discuss that, but realize also that there are provincial laws for each province that are slightly different and have different variations. And we'll sort of explain that. Now, neither Phil nor I are lawyers, but both of us are able to read plain language when it's expressed in the law, and also able to read articles, which we're going to show you. And it would appear that Scientology is in very blatant violation of the law in Canada at this point.
And has been for a long time. Uh, for starters, Scientology doesn't have religious status in Canada. Um, they're not a charitable organization either. So they uh, they actually don't have the status to fit in any of these categories.
Right. So let's just start here. Actually, I'm going to start on this side. The annual federal minimum wage adjustment. Effective April 1, 2023, the federal minimum wage is set at $16.65 per hour. And
I
this
see a few
applies.
I see a few Americans crying right now when they see that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
because some states here it's like $11 or
Well, the
$9.
well, I think the federal minimum wage in the United States is $7 and something, I think,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it
Or
that's
$8.
exactly right.
Yeah.
I think it went up to maybe 9, but whatever.
Well, yeah.
It
Anyway,
also
sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
it all no, it's all right. If you're not paid on an hourly basis, if your employer does not pay you on an hourly basis, you must receive at least the equivalent of the minimum wage. Okay.
Right. So
So
if you're on a salary, it has to be no less than what you would have gotten for that number of hours minimum wage.
right. And we're going to go into this more when we start talking about Sea Org members, but there are various exemptions and various little things in these laws. But it says if your employer provides you with room and or board and you accept that arrangement, your employer may reduce your wages below minimum wage. Your employer cannot reduce your wages more than 50 cents for each meal and 60 cents per day for living quarters. Now, that's not much. No, that's not much compared to the $16.65 requirement. But let's just go on. Then there is, as Phil made reference, uh, the charitable organization law in Canada. And this is the federal law. And it says that one of the charitable purposes is advancement of a religion. However, Scientology is not recognized as a religion in Canada. And it also says that there is what's called a public benefit test.
Right.
And if you watch the video I recently did with Leah and Apostate Alex, we talked a bit about this public benefit test. And I have brought this up numerous times that I wish that there was a public benefit test in the United States for tax exempt status for charitable organizations, because it is really the crux of why an organization qualifies for exempt status. It is the theory that they are providing a service that the government would otherwise have to provide. So rather than taxing them, they are exempt from taxation because they provide a good for the public that the government doesn't have to provide. And just like in the UK, this public benefit test says that its purposes and activities provide a measurable benefit to the public. The people who are eligible for benefits are either the public as a whole or a significant section of it. Now, this is where Scientology has a big, big problem, and why Scientology was unable to persuade the Charity Commission in the United Kingdom that they qualified for charitable status and thus tax exemption. Scientology cannot prove that it provides a public benefit to anybody outside the very small circle of people within Scientology who'll say, oh, yes, Scientology is helping me. It's making me more able. I'm able to do my job better, et cetera, et cetera. Soon as you step outside the walls of the organization, Scientology doesn't exist in the world. And while there are massive efforts to pump up the PR about all the good works that Scientology does that are theoretically these charitable activities, like the volunteer ministers and, helping out at hurricane relief and drug-free marshals and human rights campaigns and stuff, they're all just photo ops. They're not real activities.
Plus, even as far as volunteers go with an organization, um, only the volunteers that are out in the field doing specific duties would be possibly exempt from minimum wage. People in the offices, in the orgs, anything like that would not be exempt anyway, even if they did fall under the public benefit criteria.
Right. But the criteria that the Charity Commission in the UK looked at was, can you demonstrate that Scientology, to the greater good of society, helps? Can you provide information that shows that Scientology is actually assisting people in the community that are not just members inside their walls? And this is where Scientology is incapable of doing it. I mean, we put together these massive presentations for the Charity Commission in the UK, the videos of Narcanons around the world, and all of the usual stuff that you see at IAS events or in those little kiosks in the ideal orgs where you go and push a button and you see, or watching on Scientology TV, the great works that they're doing to help the world. But the Charity Commission in the UK said, well, show us some people in the UK. Where are all these people you've gotten off drugs? Well, there's one creepy little Narcanon in the entirety of the United Kingdom, and it doesn't really have anybody in it, and it doesn't really have anybody that's gone through the program. So despite the videos about Narcanon Shalako and this and that, There's nothing in the UK that shows there's a public benefit. Well, what about the volunteer ministers? Well, we helped out with a hurricane in Indonesia and with, a mudslide in Angola. And yeah, but what about in the UK? Yeah, well, we don't really have anything that we can show you about that. Oh, okay. What about the human rights? Oh yes, we've been at the United Nations. Oh yes, we have all these black children holding up our little booklets in Central America. Yeah, but what about in the UK? Yeah, not so much. We don't have anything that we can show you. And if we went to Canada and if Scientology tried to do the same thing in Canada, it would be the exact same problem. There is no real activity outside the walls of the small, tiny Scientology organizations in Canada. So there is no public benefit to the broad public. And thus, Scientology will never qualify for charitable status in Canada. It's
Right.
it's what every country should do. I can't stress this enough. Okay, so Phil, you came across an article, and this is, I think, how this got started. And well,
Right.
it's certainly how you first brought it to my attention.
Yeah.
And it's in the province of Quebec,
Yeah.
with respect to the org there in Montreal, right?
Yeah. No,
Okay,
it's in Quebec.
it's the
In
Quebec
Quebec
org.
City.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to show you the first page of this article. Well, no, I'm not. I'm showing you this. There's the first page. And it says, did the Church of Scientology pay what it owed its employees? And this is from May this year. No, May
No,
2019.
2007. Oh, 19 rather. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I believe it took place in, I'll have to double check. I thought it was 2017. This might be an update on the article, but it was around that time though, 18, 19,
right.
2018 or 19.
Okay. And I'm going to read a bunch of things from this article because it's really interesting. It says, we will never know if the Church of Scientology paid its employees the hundreds of thousands of dollars that Quebec's Labor Standards Board ruled they are owed. The parties have reached a confidential out-of-court settlement. So the Quebec Labor Standards Board determined that Scientology did in fact owe minimum wage to its employees.
As well as holiday pay
Right,
and overtime as well. Yeah.
right. The board, known by its French acronym CNESST, had sought more than $750,000 on behalf of 62 people who worked at the Church of Scientology in Quebec City.
These are
Fol-
ex-Scientology staff members.
Right. Following an investigation, it concluded those employees had been underpaid and were owed pay for statutory holidays or vacation time. The CNESST asked Quebec Superior Court to order the organization to pay the wages owed plus interest and indemnities for a total of more than $900,000.
Yeah.
This is for a tiny org. Tiny org.
Yeah.
Okay, they opened their investigation last June after reports by Radio Canada's investigative program. Radio Canada reviewed paid stubs that showed members of the Church of Scientology had been paid below minimum wage. For example, one member was paid $70 for nearly 40 hours of work in a week, less than $2 an hour. And they have the receipt to prove it right there in the paper. It goes on to talk about this out-of-court settlement. The case is now closed. A spokesperson for CNESST said the terms of the settlement are confidential and would not comment further. This is very, very typical of Scientology. When they settle something that is not favorable to them, they require that as a term of settlement that nobody speak about it. And you have seen this with civil litigation. On the other hand, if Scientology wins somehow a settlement and is paid money, they want to announce it from the rooftops. Remember Eli Lilly and David Miscavige's smug response that they paid more money than, and he didn't say the exact number because that might have actually been embarrassing, but they paid us a boatload of money. I mean, it was actually a nuisance settlement for those people. The amount of money that Scientology got did not cover the cost of the lawyers that were employed to bring that case. But anyway, I digress. The headline subhead in here then says religious workers. It's not known if the Church of Scientology is now conforming to Quebec's labor laws. Ha. This is not the first time the Church of Scientology has been investigated by Quebec's Labor Standards Board. Radio Canada identified 2 other cases, one in Quebec City and one in Montreal, which have also been settled out of court. So there are 2 other cases that were brought. A spokesperson for the Church of Scientology maintained last year that its personnel were not, quote, employees, unquote, but rather, quote, religious workers, unquote. They voluntarily contribute to the activities of the church and its humanitarian goals. Okay. We already talked about this. The idea that Scientology is a religious organization is their assertion, not the actual state of the law in Canada. And the fact that they are volunteers, we're going to get to that in a minute, because there is no such thing as a volunteer on a contract.
Right.
There is no exemption. In fact, the article goes on to say, however, the concept of religious workers does not exist in Quebec's labor law.
Right.
So this, and then it goes on to say they're offering bonuses to people to recruit and play the game and recruit. Okay. This is pretty clear that Scientology has been in violation of the at least the Quebec labor laws, have been found in violation of them, have settled cases with a gag order so that there can be no information about what they're doing. And I 100% guarantee they are not paying minimum wage to staff in Quebec or Montreal orgs.
Anywhere, because they're not allowed to, because they have to follow Hubbard dictates on how to pay the staff.
Right. So they are continuing this. Now, Phil, let's talk about Ontario, because Ontario is where Toronto is, and Toronto is where the Sea Organization outpost in
Well,
Canada is.
the outpost actually now is in Guelph, Ontario, which is outside of uh, Toronto. I went by there. My nephew works there, my sister's son, and I went by there one day, and there was a bunch of Sea Org members standing outside having their cigarettes, and I went up to them and said, "Oh, I just came by to say hello to my nephew. He works here." So somebody ran up to get him, and I knew what was going to happen as soon as my name was mentioned. But I chatted with them all for a while and stuff. But there were maybe 6 to 8 people outside. There were probably more inside. I'm not sure how many Sea Org members work there, but they have a specific building that is a Sea Org building in Guelph. They do have the place they bought up north for the AO, but to my understanding, there's nothing there really. If there's one person watching the place, I'd be surprised.
Yeah, since Stephanie Headley escaped, well, they've
Yeah,
had various incidents there. I think that I mean, what I have seen more of is people going through and taking videos of the derelict property than
yeah.
any advancements from Scientology on turning it into the advanced organization, which was the big news. I don't know, 12 years ago or something.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
we bought this property. We're opening a new AO to fulfill the demand.
And they haven't even touched Toronto after decades of fundraising,
I,
millions of dollars.
I know Toronto org is like,
Ah,
it's funny when that org was first purchased, which I think was in 1976, 75 or 76, I
somewhere in
seem to
there.
recall. And L. Ron Hubbard was the one who selected that building and said it must be purchased. I remember because I was in the Commodore's Messenger org in Clearwater, and he was communicating to me about the finance office getting this building purchased because it was such a great building. And frankly, it is one of the best Scientology organization buildings anywhere in the world. I
It
mean,
would have been if they would have maintained it.
yeah,
It's a wreck right now. But
of
we spent a lot of time in that building. Willie was on staff in that building, and w when there's the raid that happened in Canada back in 80, I can't remember the year it was now, 81 or 80. Anyway, she was on staff at the time, had to leave for a doctor's appointment. 10 minutes later, the raid happened. I'm so glad she was not in the building when that happened.
yeah, me too. Uh, but in any event, that building was a very, very nice
Yeah,
building. Perhaps at the time it was purchased was the nicest class 5 Scientology organization anywhere in the world, and it is one of the very few buildings that was designated as an acceptable ideal org building. So Toronto didn't have to buy a new building. Unlike almost every other org on earth, the only other ones that I can think of that have been exempted from that is Los Angeles org because of the Big Blue complex.
mm,
Every other class 5 org on the planet has had to purchase a new property for their ideal org. And they have had to raise tens of millions of dollars to get one that was big enough, blah, blah, blah. Toronto didn't ever have to do that.
mm,
Toronto is the continental org of Canada. It is in the biggest city in Canada. It used to be one of the biggest orgs in the Scientology world back in the days of Emil Gilbert.
yeah,
It was a
yeah. Well,
big,
I was on staff when Emil was the ED.
yeah. I'm not saying that
That's
Emil was the
that's
greatest
my
guy in the world, but I'm just saying, I'm just sort of going,
No, I get
hey,
you. There was a
back in
lot
the
of action
day,
back then. It was back then.
Toronto, DC,
Yeah,
Miami, Munich, they were the big Scientology orgs on planet
yeah,
Earth.
yeah,
And Toronto, since that time, has just been on a continuous, steady decline,
yeah,
both in terms of the size of the organization and in terms of the property. And despite the fact that they didn't have to buy a new building, they still, 20 years later, have not managed to renovate the building they have to make it an ideal org.
Well, they raised money a long time ago when we were still under the radar. My sister, who's OT8, very active in the Toronto field, or was anyway back then, she told me they had raised $5 million, and Int needed the money for some emergency, and way it went. And after that, they had to have raised at least another $5 or $10 million over the years, and they still have not done a single thing on that on that
I
building.
know. It's
I know
it's
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 crazy. I
astonishing. And meanwhile,
Yeah,
they opened that stupid place down there in Cambridge or whatever that. What
Cambridge.
is that,
Yeah,
Cambridge?
Cambridge. Yeah, I've been by there a number of times, taking pictures. There's never really much going on there either, and that's an ideal org building. That one.
Right. In the
Uh,
middle of nowhere.
so in the middle, kind of in the middle of nowhere, but yeah, there's no. Uh, yeah. Uh,
Well, it's not like the center of downtown Toronto, which is
no, and there's
where the Toronto org is,
Yeah.
except that's now in out in the sticks in Guelph.
Flower outside Toronto. Yeah.
Anyway, so
Yeah.
we sort of digress, but I haven't talked to you about anything in Canada, and it's kind of interesting to hear a little bit about the background and history
Yeah.
of Scientology in Canada too, just in general. But whether the org is in their building on Yonge Street or in out in the sticks in Guelph, there are Sea Org members that are working and living in facilities, Scientology facilities in Ontario. So
Right.
Phil very kindly pulled what the law with respect to minimum wage in Ontario is. And you will see here, we're going to start here. Minimum wage. This is from, Ontario government.org or whatever the website is. But right at the top of this thing about minimum wage, it says minimum wage is the lowest wage rate an employer can pay an employee. Most employees are eligible for minimum wage, whether they are full time, part time, casual employees, or are paid an hourly rate, commission, piece rate, flat rate, or salary. I mean, this is encompassing of anybody and everybody. You can't pay them less than what the minimum wage is,
Right.
which
Even if they're on piecework, they still
ex-
have to make at least as much as you would have made minimum wage.
right, casual employees,
Yeah.
casual. I mean, even if they denominated these people volunteers and that was accepted, that's still a casual employee. Like, I mean, because they have a contract, they have a requirement to show up in the morning.
Right.
They're not just appearing when they feel like it willy-nilly. Okay, so here's where it really gets interesting, because the minimum wage in Ontario, and I'm not even going to bother showing this to you, but it is basically the same as the federal. It's
Right.
$16.65 an hour. But there are these requirements, how provision of room and board affects minimum wage. So the amounts that an employer is deemed to have paid to the employee as wages for room or board or both is set out below. Now, I highlighted the room and the meals, and then I realized, wait, there's room and meals weekly. And so if you take the average Sea Org member who lives in a dormitory, which is a non-private room, providing room and meals weekly with a non-private room is equivalent to $69.40.
Right.
Now, if you take a Sea Org member and all Sea Org members work 7 days a week, let's say they work 10 hours a week, 10 hours a day, I mean, which is very, very, very generous.
Yeah.
Most work 16, but okay, let's take 10. 10 times 7 is 70. 70 times $16.65 is $1,165 a week. Deduct the non-private room and meals of $69.40, and you end up with pretty much exactly $1,100 a week that every Sea Org member in Ontario, every Sea Org member in Canada should be being paid $1,100 a week.
So imagine from that, a Sea Org member working 10 years, every day for 10 years, and all that time, at the end of it, how much money is owed to that Sea Org member?
Well, if we just take 10 years, Phil,
Incredible.
and we take $1,100 a week and just bring it down to 1,000 and say it's
Yeah,
$50,000 a year, 10 years, that's
half a million
$500,000.
dollars each staff member who's worked 10 years, and a lot of them have worked 20 years or more.
Exactly.
Amazing. Yeah.
So if you're a former or current employee, or particularly a Sea Org member in Canada, you probably have a really good claim to be reimbursed by Scientology for all of the hours and time that you put in that you were
Yeah.
not paid for.
Probably worth asking an attorney, that one. But
Yeah,
it
yeah.
it seems pretty clear, but I still, I mean, I would talk if it was me, I would talk to an attorney, but, I'm not gonna advise anybody one way or another, but that's a lot of money. That's worth checking into.
It is a lot of money, and honestly, it's it's only a lot of money when I mean, paying people minimum wage is not a lot of money.
Right,
I
right.
mean, we have this view of it as, oh my God, can you imagine a staff member actually getting, or a SEAL member getting $1,100 a week? How outrageous that
That's
is!
a good point, Mike. It's not, it's minimum wage. You can't live in Canada on minimum wage. You just can't even pay rent in Canada on minimum wage. So, yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot in terms of org staff or Sea Org staff, but in terms of living in Canada and the expenses of Canada, it's not a lot of money.
No, of course not. And it is crazy. I hope that this video might encourage people in other countries. I'm going to definitely send this to Apostate Alex and ask him to take a look at what
I,
happens in the United Kingdom and what are the laws there.
I've looked at other countries, Mike. There are a lot of other countries that don't have the exemptions.
Right.
So I think
Well,
Scientology has been just violating the law all over the world for a long, long time.
yeah, I imagine that there are quite a lot of places in the European Union that,
Yeah.
just given the sort of tendency of the European Union to be very pro working people
Yeah.
and the rights of individuals, and they've got all these laws there now protecting your information and privacy and all that sort of stuff. I bet that there is some interesting laws in the
Yeah.
European Union relating to
Yeah.
minimum wage and labor law violations that, if someone would take a little time to dig into it, and maybe some lawyers out there want to dig into it, there may be a way of at least partially recompensing people for the slave labor that they have provided to
Yeah.
Scientology,
Right.
because there are a lot more ex staff and ex Sea Org members than there are current staff and current Sea Org members. Um, and it's a small part of how the damage for the abuses that people have suffered could be made up.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, it
And there are a lot of countries. I think Australia too. I think I checked Australia as well, but there's a lot of places that have no exemptions for minimum wage for religious workers.
Yeah, I don't know about Australia because I remember they had an
Yeah.
ombudsman's investigation or something into labor law. I will ask some of my Australian buddies
Yeah.
after they've watched this whether there is anything that can be done, because you know, like I said, all over the place, anywhere where there are laws that are intended to protect workers, probably have laws that are applicable to Scientology. And it's just a matter of someone taking the time and making the effort to get those laws enforced.
Yeah,
Because
imagine how Scientology would deal with that. If they were forced to pay their staff minimum wage in any country that it's required, that'd be a bit of a hit on Scientology, I think.
a bit, I mean,
I
Scientology's
know. Yeah.
Scientology's empire is built on slave labor,
Yeah,
literally,
that's true. Yeah, that's true.
literally.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, there is nobody who receives money for working in Scientology. It is like having a labor force that is free, effectively. Sea Org members
right.
are basically free. I mean, it does cost the organization something to feed them rice and beans or whatever and put a roof over their head. They don't really get health care, at least not up to what they should be getting. Staff members, they're provided nothing. They just get a
Yeah.
pay stub with a few dollars stapled to it once a week, and that's it. That, there is no
Yeah.
expense. Scientology, you realize Scientology charges up to $1,000 an hour for delivering Scientology auditing to someone,
Yeah.
and that person at Flag is being paid $70, like less than $1 an hour for providing services that they are charging
So,
$1,000 an hour
I know.
for.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy.
These are not
Yeah.
made up numbers. This
No.
is not like theoretical. Oh yeah, well they're paying them $1 and they're charging 1,000. No, that's reality. They're charging, actually, they're paying less than $1 and they're charging in some cases more than $1,000 for that. So
Yeah.
this is a very, very big deal and a very, very important subject, and perhaps a very, very ripe chink in the armor of Scientology to be pierced by people who are in jurisdictions where there may
And
be a way of getting the government to act.
and it's been done. The lawsuits in Quebec, $900,000. That's a significant sum to, for Scientology to cough up. And then there were the other 2 or 3 cases that we didn't know the amounts, but there were settlements in those cases as well. So, um, you know, definitely it has been done, and I think, and hopefully it can be done again.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Phil, which is why I thought that this was a very important video to get out. I just don't think that people have realized that this may be the case,
Yeah.
and probably are unaware of the fact that they may be able to do something. They
Yeah.
they may have the right to recover a bunch of money,
Yeah.
and for the time and slave labor that they invested in Scientology. Good
Right.
luck
Get
to
some of
them.
that. Yeah, really get some of that dough, get an education if you need it, go to college, whatever, get your life going. But it'd be nice to have the boost like that for some of these people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, uh, I've sort of run to the end of what I thought that we would cover in this. Do you have anything else that you want to add, Phil?
I think we covered all we could at this point. There's still some digging I'm doing, and there's a few things coming up still. So, we'll see what comes up in the future. Maybe we can get together again on it, and let me know what Alex thinks about the UK.
Yes, I absolutely will. And look, if you do want to dig into this and come up with information, you can write to me on my blog, mikerindasblog.org. Is there a way for people to get a hold of you, Phil, or they can just write to me and I'll forward it to you?
Um, yeah,
I
I
don't
should
want you to
actually.
give out your personal
No,
email.
I probably should set something up for that. If yeah, if for now, and what I'll do is I'll see if I can come up with an email or some way that people can get a hold of me if they need to.
Okay, but if you have information that you think is relevant to this that I might want to know or Phil might want to know, you can just click on the contact me button on my blog. And I will be very interested in what you have to say. If you need some help in some way to, connect you up with people that might be like-minded or lawyers or whatever, just send me an email. We'll see what we can do. I would be thrilled to be able to help anybody recover anything in this fashion.
Yeah,
And we will definitely get back together again, Phil. I think that
yeah,
we have a lot more stuff that we should be talking about. I think we should do an episode also about disconnection at some point. I've done
yeah,
plenty of them, but it is always
yeah. Actually, I might have a contact form. I think I do still on stopscientologydisconnection.com. There should be a contact form in there. If someone does want to reach me, they can reach me through that.
Okay, good. Say that again.
Stopscientologydisconnection.com. And then there should be a contact form link in there.
Okay.
It looks
Well,
like I'm in the Keys or something here with this lighting. I'm sorry about
I
that.
see
It's
that.
late afternoon. I said, yeah, I'm going to go have my cocktail out on the boat.
You could have a pina colada with a
Pina colada.
little
Yeah,
umbrella in it.
the umbrella.
Okay, I will include that link in the description of this video, the
Okay.
stopscientologydisconnection.com, and I will include all of these things that we have shown you here, links to all of these documents on my blog. I will do a blog post that, like I usually do when I do a video, I do a concurrent blog post that has the video and has all the documents, easy to download and read online, because I know if you watch this on your phone, there's no way that you could read anything. Even if you watched it on your computer screen, you may not be able to read it. They're very small. So I like to always have the documents there. Anyway, Phil, it's a real pleasure to chat with you. I appreciate and thank you for bringing this to my attention. And actually, I look forward to seeing you and Willie in the near future.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the trip. So I appreciate you having me on, Mike. This has been great to get this out. And I think this thing could have legs. So I'm definitely going to pursue it more.
Okie dokie. Well, I'm going to say goodbye for now. Thank you again, Phil. See you next time. That's all for now. Thank you for tuning in. You can find more episodes of Exposing Scientology, both on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to check out my best-selling memoir, A Billion Years, My Escape from a Life in the Highest Ranks of Scientology. It's available on Amazon and as an audiobook. Until next time, be well and happy.